Hey, City Center Baptist Church family, it's Pastor Brad coming to you from DDQ headquarters. Digging Deeper question number 6 this week asks, according to 2 Corinthians chapter 12, verse 10, how can we learn to be content while experiencing suffering? What is one possible purpose for our weakness? The Christian life is full of paradoxes. The poor will be rich, the last will be first, the least will be greatest, and the weak will be strong. These appear on the surface to be self-contradictory, but on closer examination they proclaim essential spiritual truths that only make sense within a biblical worldview. God doesn't play by humanity's rules. He is sovereign over all his creation, and he determines how life ought to be lived in order for every creature to flourish. Those who are poor materially can become rich in faith and see God provide for their needs miraculously. Those who are last and overlooked may find their significance in their identity as God's beloved children. Those who the world deems as the least may one day find themselves in the places of honor in God's kingdom. And those who are weak have the opportunity to discover that God's power is far greater than any human being's power. The lesson for us is that those who are self-reliant will ultimately be disappointed, whereas those who are God-reliant will have all their needs met, and more. The Apostle Paul had had more than his fair share of suffering, as he described in 2 Corinthians chapter 11. He was also facing criticism from certain false teachers who were sowing confusion and discord among the church family members in Corinth. He defended his status as Christ's apostle by showing that the marks of a true apostle and of all true Christ followers was the presence of suffering for Christ's sake. He reminded us that this life is difficult and full of trouble. When you are a leader in Christ's gospel ministry, you become a target for the enemy's attacks. Paul knew this and embraced it. And he called the people of Corinth to likewise live for the future Christ promised and not to be distracted by what this world offered. In his defense, Paul outlined all the sufferings he had endured, and he noted his weaknesses as well. He related the story of an extraordinary vision of heaven God had given him. To ensure Paul did not start to think of himself more highly than he ought, God gave him a thorn in the flesh. God's protection was lifted, and Satan was allowed to afflict him in some unspecified manner. Paul prayed 3 times that his thorn would be removed, but God told him his grace would be sufficient and that his power would be perfected in Paul's weakness. With that explanation, Paul was satisfied. After all, life is about God's glory, not ours. The focus is on God, not us. And whatever we face in this life, it will never be able to compare with what God has in store for us in eternity. All our troubles will be forgotten once we arrive in his glorious eternal presence. These same assertions can be found in Romans 5, verses 3-5, where hard times are said to develop our characters, and in Romans 8, 31-39, where we are assured that no hardship will ever separate us from God's love for us, and in 1 Peter chapter 4, verses 12 and 13, where Peter encouraged us not to fear trials, but to look forward to Christ's glory to be revealed at his second coming. So, be content even in weakness and suffering, because God's power and provision is promised to those who trust him. This has been Pastor Brad coming to you from DDQ headquarters.